So today we are in the book of Numbers in chapter 26. And we have been going through the census of the people of Israel, tribe by tribe, and we have been kind of diving into the storylines of different tribes as we go. We have gone through Reuben, Simeon, and Levi this far, and today we are in God. So from verse 15 to verse 18 are the verses today. The sons of God, according to their families, were of Zephon, the family of the Zephonites, of Haggi, the family of the Haggites, of Shuni, the family of the Shunites, of Osni, the family of the Osnites, of Eri, the family of the Erites, of Arod, the family of the Arodites, of Areli, the family of the Arelites. These are the families of the sons of God, according to those who were numbered of them, 4,500. So, about 38 years earlier, they had another census in the wilderness, after they had left Egypt on their second year in the wilderness. And I've been kind of building comparisons between these tribes as we go. And with God, I kind of would say, compared to many others, nothing major happened. They lost 11% of their strength. They used to be about 45,500, now they're 40,500. So about 5,000 men of war. That is their loss in the 38 years of wandering in the wilderness. But what comes to Gad, they are one of these interesting kind of unknown tribes in Israel. There is not much maybe known of them, not much interest paid into them in the church in general. But they were a tribe that in Israel were known as having a great military spirit. They were a nation of war, and they were dwelling on the side of the promised land. So they were protecting the border always, and they were keeping that safe. And during the reign of Saul, the king, many people actually fled to the area of God just to have protection and safety in their midst. But they also settled to less than what God had for them. When the Israel finally came into Promised Land, there were 2.5 tribes that actually left on the east side of Jordan instead of coming into the Promised Land. There were Gad, there were Reuben, and there were the other half of the tribe of Manasseh. They saw that the land was really good for tending sheep and other flocks, and they were having a lot of those. So they asked from Moses if they're allowed to have their lot on the east side of Jordan instead of in the Promised Land. And Moses first saw it as a rebellion, but it got settled and it got accepted, and they got their lots there, but they agreed to leave their families behind to the east side of Jordan, but go into war with the rest of the children of Israel to the Promised Land to take it over and conquer it. And no doubt that land that they got was good land as they saw it, but yet it wasn't the best that God had for them. God intended Israel to go and inhabit the Promised Land, the land of Israel. And I think in some sense, it's kind of human of them to settle for less. That's what we typically do. We aim low because it feels safer. It's usually a strategy to survive in the life, to aim for the lowest possible outcome that you can still live with instead of the fullest. We usually have some sort of range in our mind of the lowest to the best, and when we reach the lowest bar, we usually settle instead of fight for more. You can imagine yourself after 38 years of wandering in the wilderness, and finally there is a land that you have conquered, you have taken over. There are cities that you can live in. You can have a place for your family, for your children, for your cattle. You can have a place to rest. instead of still pressing on, trusting in God's promises Well, they got the land. And with the land, they got the border lands of Israel from the east side of Jordan. Jordan was to be the protection of Israel, the border of Israel, because it was a wide, good river, keeping the attacking enemies from easy entrance to the land. But now God got the land border against the heathen nations, and they were constantly under attack. They were constantly in war, they were constantly fighting, and they were the first ones of the tribes of Israel to be taken into captivity. So they got a land that looked good, but they didn't get the best of it. And if we read the report of the spies that went to spy the promised land earlier, a few chapters earlier in the book of Numbers, that land was really good. I'm sure what God had for them was even better land, but they didn't even go and see. They decided that they have marched far enough. They want to have land here. And they got the land there. But that's, I think, something for us to learn as Christians. That we are, with God, we are never to settle for the low. And if He has promised us a good land, if He has promised us something, we shouldn't settle for anything less. There is so much temptations in this life and in this world that look very good on the outside, but can really just end up destroying our lives. We remember this with Abraham, who was promised a son from God, but he was nearing 90 years and his wife was around 80. And they decided that, okay, we'll help God a little bit. So Sarah gave her handmaid to Abraham, and Abraham had a son from her, Ishmael. And Abraham wanted to settle. He was happy. He had finally a son of the promise. But Ishmael was not the son of the promise. And God gave him Isaac. But I feel like without all these missteps in the way, many things could have been easier. God also blessed Ishmael and promised to multiply them and make them a strong nation. And they are to this day, in numbers, much stronger than Israel. But they were not the promised people. Isaac was. And never are we to settle. So, what we have here and how the children of God were described in the Bible, we can turn into 1 Chronicles chapter 12, starting from verse 8, where it says, "Some Gadites joined David at the stronghold in the wilderness, mighty men of valor, men trained for battle, who would handle shield and spear, whose faces were like the face of lions, and were as swift as gazelles on the mountains. Ezer the first, Obadiah the second, Eliab the third, Mishmanath the fourth, Jeremiah the fifth, Attai the sixth, Eliel the seventh, Jonaham the eighth, Elizabad the ninth, Jeremiah the tenth, and Machbanai the 11th. These were from the sons of God, captains of the army. The least was over 100, and the greatest was over 1,000. These are the ones who crossed the Jordan in the first month, when it had overflowed in its banks, and they put to flight all those in the valleys to the east and to the west." It's amazing that it says that they crossed over from Jordan when it was the flood season, because that river was like mile wide during the flood season. It was a mighty river. It was quite a task. I imagine with some sort of weaponry, they went over it. They were great warriors. But I don't know, maybe God was too much relying on its warrior strength and less relying on the strength of God. And I feel like that's what I many times do, because it feels easier to rely on the things we can see instead of God. But that's what I want us to pray today, is what is God's will for our lives? What is His best for us? What's His plan? Not what we have planned for ourselves. That's another thing. I think I often make plans and then I pray God to help me with that instead of following His plans. But to pray what is His plan. For Gad, it was clear. It was the promised land. They were supposed to go over. They were supposed to take the land that God had promised them and their great grandfathers, or the people who went before them for 400 years. And I'm sure for us as well, God reveals what is His plan. And we can go before Him in prayer.